you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. Thanks so much for coming out to the Gov AI Summit. Let's dive right in. So you've heard a little bit this morning about the opportunity for AI and automation, okay, across a number of different businesses. And one thing that I hope that you take away from this time together this morning is a little bit about IBM's position in differentiating what is required for enterprise AI and applying these technologies inside of a business framework across very complex business processes and how that differs a little bit from consumer interaction with AI. We know that about a third of processes across a business framework will actually be automated by things like agents by 2028. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, how you apply these technologies in the context of business today, and the opportunity across a set of different use cases and some of the technical decision points that I think it would be privy for you to be aware of as you make decisions about how to apply this very broadly inside of your business. So as I know you've heard in the last two sessions, there has been massive and very broad experimentation with AI technology, and specifically generative AI. If we look at kind of what the hype cycle of something like ChatGPT was, I'm sure if I asked every one of you in the room if you've been on ChatGPT, if you didn't raise your hand, I would know you're probably lying because we've all tried it at some point, right? Just to see what the experience is like. To do Q&A. People are doing things like retrieval augmented generation and applying these architectures fairly broadly across different domains within their business. Consumers use it every day, right? To generate content, to write emails, to answer questions, to do research. There's all types of things that we can use this for. But I will tell you, after having probably over 1,200 conversations on my own since the beginning of 2023, and after looking across around 10,000 pilots globally that IBM has done, there are still many challenges when it comes to actually implementing this technology and scaling it out to the point where you would candidly say that you received the actual ROI that you were looking for from the application of AI and automation. So what are some of those issues when we talk about scaling this technology internally, right? We still see a lot of integration challenges. There are people that are dealing with legacy systems, with new systems, with things like data silos, not really understanding things around data accessibility or having the right data foundation in order to be able to have your data actually fuel the result that AI could bring to your organization. We see things like a talent skill gap. It's very hard to actually acquire the vast variety of skills that you need to put one of these use cases in action. I know sometimes we just talk about acquiring people like data scientists, or we say words like AI engineers, right? People who can build these applications. But to actually put something in production at scale within your business requires a wide variety of skill sets. They're expensive, they're often hard to come by, so we see organizations having challenges with that. We'll talk a little bit about AI governance today, right? You guys are no stranger to policy, to compliance, but there's a lot more to governance than that. When we think about security of our data, we think about AI security, how that affects many of the choices around the models that we make and the technologies that we use, and what it means to be able to govern your data and AI at scale, okay? So I mentioned to you, IBM's done over 10,000 pilots in this space, and still yet, there are clients that come to us and say, we tried this use case, we've tried this technology, but it just hasn't taken off within our business as we would have hoped. This is probably the best content that I can give you to synthesize what I think we've learned over the course of the last 24 months or so, as we have helped businesses try and put this technology to work for them. I would also tell you that these are the core tenets that IBM has now built our AI platform around. This is what we really believe is necessary for businesses to be able to capture the full advantage of AI and automation working at scale within an enterprise. The first piece here is that we believe folks need to embrace a platform that embraces multiple models. There's not one model that's going to do all of the things or all of the use cases that you come up with within your business, and that's okay. But many corporations and many enterprises now ask the question, how do I choose the right model? Before I came in here today, I did a quick search on Hugging Face. Hopefully you guys are familiar with Hugging Face. It's where lots of different models live. People download a model, they fork a model, and then they kind of re-upload it. And I will tell you, 3 weeks ago when I logged into Hugging Face, there were around 469,000 models available to choose from. When I logged in this morning, there were 1,075,000 models to choose from. The interesting part about that is that Not many of those models are actually that different, right? People have downloaded things like Llama 3, or they've downloaded different versions of, maybe GPT, and they have made a simple modification to that model and they've re-uploaded it. How do you decide, right? Out of a million models that you could choose from on Hugging Face, what to use and what to use when? We believe that there is a blend of a commercial and an open source model strategy that most enterprises will settle on. And what that means is that you're going to choose different models for different use cases, but you actually need many of the customization, the tuning tools, and the techniques to make these models perform in a relevant way and a high-performant way for your business, right? So that takes a platform. That's piece one. Piece two, we believe people will embrace a multi and hybrid cloud architecture around AI, right? One of the biggest challenges to actually scaling out these AI use cases that we talk about is your data. Your data doesn't always live in the same place that you're trying to access the technology. IBM's point of view, and has been our point of view since 2019, right? We made a commitment that was called Watson Anywhere. And we said, why should people actually have to bring their data to us and put it inside of our cloud to be able to take advantage of some of these AI technologies? Why don't we just bring these AI capabilities to them and where their data lives? We see this very prominently in highly regulated industries. When you look across financial services, when you look across government use cases, healthcare use cases, people say much of my sensitive or regulated data actually still sits in my data center, or it sits in an isolated environment on a third-party cloud. Should you actually have to move that data in order to take advantage of some of the technologies we'll talk about today? IBM thinks that you shouldn't. And we know that 95% of the world's enterprises and corporations actually operate today in a very multi and hybrid cloud environment. So our goal is to be able to make these capabilities available anywhere. If you choose to go deploy those on AWS, on Azure, on Google Cloud, inside of your own data center, even at the edge, we have clients that are deploying these capabilities in a wide variety of locations. The third element I would tell you is critical and important, and a core tenet of our platform is all around governance and security. And this really embraces everything that we do from a data and an AI perspective, okay? I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this today, but these are capabilities all around compliance, around policy enforcement, federal regulations, global regulations, state regulations, regulations or policies that you may put in place for your own enterprise or your own organization that you want to enforce across very democratized use of this technology throughout your enterprise. It's that piece. It's also managing the overall life cycle. From the time that a use case is actually thought up or derived inside of your business, how do you have the right controls, the right traceability, the right explainability around how AI is being used, who has access to the data, and what happens throughout the course of that process? And then finally, it's things around model monitoring. And model monitoring of all sorts, right? There's lots of traditional AI and machine learning models in use today. There's things like financial models in use today. And then we're still on a journey to learn how we deal with the risk of some of these generative AI technologies. We actually have to be able to have an enterprise platform that embraces governance and security across any type of AI technology or AI model that you choose to use, not just what comes from the IBM platform. So we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this. Number 4 that you see on this chart, scaling for value. I would say is probably one of the most important things that you'll see come out through the course of this presentation today. And I would tell you it's probably the number one reason that we have seen people not be able to move from pilot to production. Lots of people said, we'll just do experimentation. We'll do massive experimentation at scale. Pretty easy to just try a model out of the box and to do very functional tasks like summarization, content generation, classification type tasks. And we support all of those things, right, with Watson X. But a lot of people would say, hey, we're actually not going to think about the scale of doing this for our business because we're just playing around. We're just trying it out, right, to see what kind of value could be here. And then people would come back to us and they would say, hey, we tried this with another technology platform, but what we found was it actually cost us more to run the model than the ROI that we could generate from, right? ROI became a bit of an afterthought instead of something that was a little bit more forward-thinking about if the experimentation worked, would it add value to the organization? Our point of view is almost that you should do a value assessment. You should think about the ROI in terms of the feasibility analysis of the use cases that you have to select from, almost before you get into a very heavy experimentation phase. So we're going to talk about scaling for value and some of the technical decision points that IBM believes are really important and are now core tenets of our platform so that you actually can take advantage of this technology at scale within your business. And then finally, the fifth piece, you'll hear me talk about data today. A data foundation, organizing your data, having quality with your data, data accessibility, how you catalog your data. The data foundation is critical and important. I've visited a lot of enterprises that have said over the course of time, we did this huge data initiative, right? We worked really hard to curate all of our data. Newsflash, folks, there's more, the volume, veracity, velocity of data that's being created every single day in every one of our organizations means that that data curation and caring and feeding the data foundation is not a one-time occurrence, right? It's something that has to continually happen inside of our organization, and it must continually happen because data is really the fuel for AI performing at scale. So let's talk a little bit about the AI value creation curve. Okay, so again, we've seen massive experimentation, and I can't tell you the number of enterprises that I've been in that have said, we're doing things like retrieval augmented generation, Q&A, all sorts of AI assistants across different domains and processes within an enterprise. But IBM really believes that we're at quite a tipping point, right? If you really think about it, this stuff is relatively simplistic in nature. When we try to apply those same concepts to things like IT automation, to things like software development, code generation, to very complex enterprise processes that touch a multitude of systems, a multitude of people, require a variety of skill sets to interact, this is where we really believe the opportunity is to create value. And what we have seen with a lot of businesses and enterprises is the first thing that they do is they think about how to add AI to an existing process in their business today, rather than kind of flipping that around and saying, how might I take an AI first mentality? The further that you get up this value creation curve, the more you're thinking about how do you apply AI and automation first, rather than just to a process that may not be as effective or efficient today, okay? Sorry, I hope that's not me doing that. Truly do. All right, so let's talk about some of the building blocks of what it actually takes to achieve what we saw on the last slide in terms of getting to the right-hand side of that value creation curve. We believe this is really a flywheel, okay? And we're gonna talk through today each of these concepts and how one supports the other. First, it starts with the use case. And I will tell you, in a lot of enterprises that I have spoken with, there is no shortage of use case ideas, right? I was meeting with a business, this has been a couple of weeks ago, and they said, Madison, we have 9,000 ideas that have been submitted on how we could take advantage of AI and automation. The question becomes, how do we sort through those? How do we decide which one is best, which one is prime for us to actually go experiment on, right? We have things that we do with clients called a feasibility analysis that actually helps us narrow in on proven, very high impact use cases where we have some pre-built and pre-baked and ready to go assets and models, as you'll see today, that actually help people take advantage of this and get a little bit more comfortable with applying AI at scale within their business. The other is we kind of get into the building blocks of what you see in the flywheel here. As we mentioned, data is critical, okay? We're kind of reaching the end of going to a foundation model that has been trained on public data or data that may not be as relevant as it could be to your business, and experimenting with that out of the box and expecting to achieve the ROI that we really need to actually fund the investment. So your proprietary data actually becomes very important to fuel the results. The model that you choose, we're going to talk about this as a building block to AI. Establishing a synergy between trust of the model, safety benchmarks of the model, cost and performance aptitude of the model across certain use cases. We see governance, right? And again, this isn't governance just on a single use case or a single model. You guys probably have AI deployed at scale, traditional AI use cases deployed at scale within your business today. How do we actually embrace an approach that encompasses all of this, right, from a governance and a security perspective, and actually enables people to use this technology in a democratized way at scale, with you still having the safety protocols and measures that you need in place? Then there's things like assistance, right, which people have been doing for quite some time now, and we'll talk a bit about today. This is where things like retrieval augmented generation really came into effect, and we saw those techniques being used across a wide variety of models. Assistance enabled and empowered to help people be more efficient in their work. And where the crux really happens then is when you introduce things like agents, which we'll talk about agents in our agentic architecture a bit today, but agents actually have the ability to learn from their environment. They have the ability to operate autonomously, but still be linked in with a human to make decisions. And as these agents are deployed across different domains within your business, they learn more and more, and they feed that back into the life cycle so that everything that we do actually gets better, and you can increase the scale of value over time. Now, you're going to hear me talk a little bit about IBM's perspective on models today, and I wanted to share this with you because one of the core and critical elements of doing that kind of use case feasibility analysis that we talk about is thinking, do you actually have a model that is pre-trained on relevant information where you could start, right? We know that some of the mainstream models that people have experimented with the most, like a GPT, are trained massively on public data. Okay, there's very little enterprise data that model has actually been trained on. You'll see IBM from a partnership and an ecosystem perspective really investing in areas whereby we can do domain training with enterprise relevant data. One great example of this for the government segment is our relationship with NASA, right? So we've taken a ton of geospatial data and along with NASA have trained a more specific domain-oriented foundation model. So if you have a geospatial use case, this might be a very probable model to get started with. You'll see IBM really focusing on models that have to do with business and with the enterprise. So thinking about business process data, IT data, you'll see things like physical asset management models, and then of course language models, code-based models that we'll talk about for a semblance of different use cases today. Now, if you're sitting out there and you're like, okay, I kind of understand some of these concepts, I'll pay attention to when we get into these concepts more and more, but where in the world do I actually start, right? What are kind of some of the core enterprise areas where we know these use cases are proven, we know they can be high impact, and they can make a difference if we take them on? There are really three entry points that IBM deems as being very proven and high impact, and we'll talk a little bit about why here in just a moment. But we have created experiences across all of these use case dimensions for you to be able to get started with. The first is what we call digital labor. And I want you to think about digital labor as being a very complex kind of end-to-end business process, okay? Whatever agency that you may work for, whatever business or enterprise that you may work for, I'm sure that you have processes that touch a multitude of systems, require access to a whole lot of data, require you to work with different domain experts in your business, that sometimes on a daily basis you wish part of this could just be automated, right? Don't you hate the processes that you have to work on where every morning when you log in, you're like, what do I have to follow up on from 2 days before? Because did somebody else do what they were supposed to do in order for me to complete the process? For us at IBM, this was something like talent acquisition, right? We used to have recruiters that touched a multitude of systems, over 17 different systems they would interact with. And the scale of how many people we could recruit and onboard at IBM was very low per recruiter. Today, through the use of the watsonx platform, data, models, governance, assistants, and agents that we just talked about, we actually automate over 90% of that process for talent acquisition. This is sourcing through things like Workday, through LinkedIn. It's using generative AI to do things like generating job descriptions, to be able to source through resumes, to summarize those resumes, having the right governance and ethics around how we do that, the offering of candidacy to some of these folks. So we need to think about kind of those digital labor use cases or areas whereby you have a very complex end-to-end enterprise business process, and we can benefit from the combination of generative AI and automation. The second area where we believe generative AI can be very prevalent and can add a lot of benefit and ROI to your business is in the customer service or the customer care domain. There's a wide variety of use cases here where we can provide personalized support from an omni-channel perspective, whether you think about doing this on a mobile app, whether you think about it being digital on your website, a voice assistant, or even helping those who help others, right? So thinking about agents and what we can do from an agent assistance perspective. We can apply different tasks like summarization, classification, content generation to update notes and systems, to do follow-ons with different individuals who are coming in to try and solve a problem. There's a myriad of use cases that we can do here, and even do different classification tasks at scale, like understanding feedback, okay, from our end users or from citizens in your all's case. So customer service is also a very, very viable opportunity. And if you have heard kind of IBM's Client Zero story, or even if you haven't, you would know that for us, applying generative AI in this domain has saved us over 165,000 hours operationally per year, okay, just by applying this in our own support division. The third area that we believe is very, very ripe for application of generative AI and automation is within the application modernization space. So we think about, how do we make developers more productive? IBM has trained code models on 116 different languages that will do things ranging from code generation to code explainability, to looking at performance vulnerabilities and how we actually update those, okay? So whether you want to do it on a legacy system like assembler code, or doing COBOL to Java, or more modern type things where you're looking at things like Python, Java, even C++ applications, we have models and experiences trained to help make developers more productive in this domain as well. So let's talk about some of these core tenets. We know that data is core to actually fueling a model, being able to improve the accuracy and performance of what we do and generate with AI. We also know that about 99% of the world's public data is already used in training existing foundation models that you could go download or that you could pay for access to today. But 1%, less than 1%, of actual enterprise or business data is used in a foundation model in any regard. And some people might look at this statistic and say, well, that's really surprising, right? Because you just talked about a lot of things that would actually require us to have business data put inside of these models to get the type of performance that we need in order to scale this within our business. I look at this really as your opportunity, right? There's been a lot of challenges with doing this in terms of data accessibility. There's a lot of sensitive and personal information that you guys have access to that is regulated in a variety of ways. So you can't exactly just go plumb this into a foundation model that everybody in the world can or has access to, okay? This is really your opportunity, right? To figure out, how do you add your proprietary data to a model and improve the performance and relevancy of the output of AI to your business. Now let me talk a little bit about models, because if we're going to apply proprietary data to models, there's some central kind of technical decision points that we need to be aware of when we use models as well. And I'd like to start by just talking a little bit about IBM's model strategy, okay? Ever since IBM has been building and generating foundation models, which has been actually for quite some time within our business, we've been using foundation models and large language models inside of things like conversational AI for 3 to 4 years now. Okay, it's been powering things like intent recognition and entity recognition. But we've made a commitment to build small foundation models, or small language models, as you may have heard them called in the market. And this was very intentional. And I will tell you guys, at first, throughout the 2023 period, probably the biggest question, and the question that I got most often from clients, was, if you focus on small language models, can I actually achieve the same performance with a small model as what I could with something like GPT that's, 186 trillion parameters out of the box, right? Can I actually do that? Because don't bigger models perform better? Don't you actually need more data in order to increase the performance? And I'll show you a case today for why IBM has actually focused on this. IBM's models that we produce them across all different types of architectures. So if you've heard of encoder-only models, decoder-only models, encoder-decoder models, or sparse models, IBM has models across the board. But our flagship family of models are the decoder-only architecture, most used for generative AI, and they're called Granite, okay? Granite is a family of models, 18 different models to be exact, and IBM announced about 8 months ago that we were open sourcing our Granite models. You can go and download Granite, use it for yourself today. Comes with an Apache 2 license whereby you can own the source code. As you choose to apply your proprietary data and build with Granite, we believe it will be the best and it will be the safest and most trusted base model for you to build inside of your enterprise and your organization with, okay? So this is about your data. It's about choosing the right base model and then having the right customization techniques in order to make this relevant for your business, to adapt that model to serve the downstream tasks that you select and to make it relevant, make it highly performant. Now, why have we focused on smaller models, smaller language models specifically, okay? I was at a company recently whereby they said to me, I've known a gentleman for quite some time, and he said, hey, I'm very interested. Could you actually do the same thing with Granite and with some of your novel training and tuning techniques that you have and achieve the same performance as what I am achieving for transcript summarization in my call center with GPT-4? And I said, sure, like we can try it, right, from a pilot perspective, but why? Why do you want to do this, right, if it's working well for you today? And he said, well, I'm doing 3 million transcripts with GPT-4, and I've already blown the budget for my use case. And so I guess the next relevant question would be, how many transcripts do you actually have to do on an annual basis? And he said, 340 million. I said, well, that's certainly not going to work, right? So we took a subset of those transcripts, showed that we could actually achieve the exact same level of accuracy and performance who's getting with GPT-4, but instead of spending $42,000 to run the model every single month on a subset of 12 billion transcripts, he would spend less than $1,000 to run that with IBM's model, Granite. Just from the sole fact that the model was much, much smaller, and when we considered the input tokens and the output tokens, the cost of inference and the cost of compute, it was a much, much lighter model for him to run and for him to scale with, okay? IBM also came out with, about 9 to 10 months ago, a very novel tuning and training technique that is called InstructLab. What we noticed about the market was that there was a lot of people talking about generative AI in an open source capacity, but there was really no contribution framework for it. That's why you find 1 million models on Hugging Face today, by the way. The base model that somebody started with never actually gets any better. They just fork the model and re-upload a new version. So how does this work inside of an enterprise for you? Don't you think that your enterprise or your business will eventually look to build a more golden base model that you can work from, that you've applied your proprietary data to? InstructLab is actually the training and tuning technique and the framework that enables that to happen, okay? We saw a lot of people in vast experimentation phases with generative AI. They were either applying things like retrieval augmented generation architectures at scale, or they would immediately jump to things like fine tuning, right? Oh, got to do fine tuning with our data if we actually want to improve the result. We said there's actually a different way, right? You should still use RAG, and in a lot of cases you may use fine tuning, but there are capabilities like prompt tuning and what we've been able to do with InstructLab that sit somewhere in the middle that are a bit of a lighter approach to being able to do just this. With the InstructLab technique, IBM actually generated a code foundation model in less than a week. This is the very technique that we used to realign and improve the performance of Granite, okay? And if you guys do not know anything about Granite's performance today, I want to show you just 3 use cases, okay, of what IBM has done on a very recent basis. We just launched Granite 3.0 last week. You could go out and read about it on Hugging Face and a variety of other websites. But looking across these use cases, standard operating procedures for a reconciliation process, a quote-to-cash process, and an IT support use case, okay? We did a comparative analysis on the accuracy that could be achieved with a Granite model that had been tuned using InstructLab, and we looked at the comparative cost savings for an enterprise doing this at scale. And you'll see a 98% cost savings, a 96% cost savings, a 94% cost savings than the model that the client was using previously. We believe that these points are super important for somebody that's looking to generate AI scale within their enterprise, right? How do you actually do this? What are some of those decision points? It's about finding the relational synergy between trust, safety of a model that you choose to use, the performance, making sure that you can actually achieve that level of accuracy with your proprietary data, and that the cost goes down so that you can generate more benefit from it, okay? Let's spend a few minutes on AI governance and security. Such an important topic, and one area where I think if you actually do any search, you'll find that IBM, from a market leadership perspective, is leading within this space. Now, it's really hard to regulate AI, right? We talked about at the beginning of this, the democratized use of many of these technologies. There were many individuals that were just trying these sorts of things on a day-to-day basis. How do you as a business actually regulate that, right? There's changing regulations all of the time. Like, we're not done with regulation coming aboard for AI. You have lots of different stakeholders. I can tell you, after having been in technology in this space for about 10 years, that there are more people who want to be involved and need to be involved in the decision-making process around generative AI technology, use cases, and the application thereof in a business than have ever been involved in another technology decision point inside of an enterprise to date. You still have increased risk, right? We know how to deal with about 70% of the risk that comes with leveraging these foundation models today. It's very similar to the risk that exists in leveraging traditional AI technology. But there's about 30% of the risk that is quite new. When we think about things like hallucinations or intentional bias or prompt injection defense, like, how do we do those things? What are the models that need to be created in order to parse through all of the data and all of the use cases that we're using to protect us from some of those things? So doing this at scale is actually quite hard. So we have a framework, and I won't tell you that it's just technology, because this is about technology, but it's also about the operating framework. It's all about the processes and the different stakeholders that you have aligned. And I'll show you a slide in just a minute for how IBM actually does this inside of our own business. But for us, having a strong AI governance and security framework and platform means it's something that connects multiple stakeholders. It's something that actually looks across the models and different technology platforms that you choose to use, not just IBM, right? If you use technology from Microsoft or from Amazon, or you use a GPT model or a Gemini model, it's about being able to look across all of those things and getting what I'll call a kind of a control tower view, right, of what's going on in terms of model usage, the risk that's associated with that model usage, the cost of the model usage, and any thresholds that may be breached or may have been mitigated that you need to be aware of, okay? It's all about securing your data, and it's all about managing to the regulation that we need to manage to. We actually have an engine at IBM that is evergreen. So as new policy is developed globally, as it's developed federally on a state and localized level, we actually plumb that into a technology platform so that certain parts of a governance framework can be automated for a business. For us, this has been quite a long journey, right? We started back in 2016 with an AI ethics board that has strong representation from our governance, our compliance, our policy office, but it also has representation across our sales, our marketing, our product, our development community, our HR community, any kind of enterprise domain-oriented group within the IBM business has a stakeholder that's involved in this ethics board and is very, very vocal about the use cases that IBM pursues internally, but also externally inside of our business. It was one cause of IBM actually saying a few years ago, hey, we actually think that there's more risk and harm in using things like facial recognition at this point in time than good. Okay, so we chose to actually exit out of that business based upon what we did within the AI ethics board. Our chief privacy office actually implements all of this technology, what we call WatsonX.governance, our governance platform. They implement at scale within our enterprise, okay? We also were a founding member of the AI Alliance. I encourage you to look this up if you don't know anything about this. Meta and IBM actually did this together, and it's all around open innovation, open source for these types of technologies rather than having things happen behind closed curtains. That means if you're interested in the data assets of what we use to train our models like Granite, if you're interested in the training techniques, the model evaluation techniques, how we actually look at how models stack up against regulatory compliance requirements, you can see that all, right? We have very public information and data sheets on all of that as it relates to not only our models, but the types of applications and AI technology that we produce, okay? So how do we do this, right? From a technology perspective, how do we actually apply AI and automation across the governance framework and the governance lifecycle? I would categorize our governance platform really into three main parts. The first is it's all about lifecycle governance. So again, from the time that an AI use case is thought up or derived within your business, what are you doing? to actually assess the risk of that use case, whether you're going to have vulnerable or risky data involved in that use case, the selection of the model that you choose to use and the risk assessment on that. And then how do we actually have traceability and explainability across the whole core of that process, from the time that the model outputs something to when it is reinforced and continues to learn over the course of time. All of this is actually automated, and a good thing that it is, because regulators and auditors are going to come asking. I can't tell you the number of businesses that I've been in when I ask, how do you do this process today? And they tell me that they have people like model validators and data scientists that get to sit in a room and actually input all of these processes and what happens across the life cycle into something like an Excel spreadsheet. Sounds like an opportunity for some efficiency improvement to me. This platform actually generates what we call a fact sheet, and I want you to think about that as almost a nutrition label for what's going on with AI inside of your business. If you looked at a nutrition label, you're going to see things like the caloric content. You're going to see things like, hey, produced in a facility with nuts or dairy. If you're allergic to these things, don't eat it, right? You're going to see all of those facts and information about what happens across the course of the model development lifecycle. So all of that is automated and something that can literally be handed to a regulator or auditor asking about a use case within your business. Now, the second area is all around risk management. And this, I think, is what people most traditionally think about when they hear the word governance applied to AI. But I will make a case today that governance is much, much more than things like model monitoring and managing the risk associated with the model that you select, okay? We have tons of model monitoring capabilities, and IBM is actually very forward-thinking and actually developing and donating to the open source community many kind of detection features. So we have things like a hallucination detection model that actually runs on CPUs versus GPUs, making it a much lower footprint, a much lower cost to be able to detect when a hallucination occurs within using some of these foundation models within your business. We just launched, from an open source perspective, something that we call a guardian model that can rest across the use of AI inside of your organization and offer some additional protection when it comes to risk mitigation and management. And then thirdly, it's all about compliance and it's all about policy enforcement. So how are you complying with the regulations that exist today that you may have to comply with? We know now that if there's actually any business that reaches across or has a part of their supply chain that touches Europe, something like the EU AI Act is actually detrimental from a financial perspective today, right? A company can lose up to 7% of its total revenue if they are non-compliant. Doing this without any automation within a business at the scale of what people are looking to use AI will not be possible, okay? Finally, just to close out, let's talk a little bit about agents, because I think this is a huge opportunity for enterprises and businesses to really increase the value that they can achieve from the use of AI. Now, there's lots of agentic frameworks out there today. You may be using them or you may have heard of them within your business, things like Llama Index, Crew AI, LangChain, and we actually embrace these too. We have partnerships. We just launched a partnership with Crew AI. We're using these types of frameworks within our business, but for IBM, we actually felt from an enterprise perspective, there's still kind of a lot of holes in terms of how you apply agents at scale within a business. So IBM, inside of our watsonx platform, we provide pro-code, low-code, and no-code ways to build and generate agent capabilities, okay? We do this in a platform called watsonx Orchestrate, which is really meant to focus on a domain expert or a business user being able to put AI and automation to work together. So we have all of the capabilities to build and generate agents, but a couple of unique things that I think we're doing and that we just announced last week actually at our Tech Exchange conference is around having some custom-built agents and having monitoring, deployment, and observability capabilities across when these agents are deployed at scale. If you think about deploying an agent, I think over the course of time, if you look at HR, if you look at procurement, if you look across a number of these different areas, you are likely to have hundreds, maybe thousands of agents deployed in those environments. How do you understand how the agents are operating, what they're learning, when a human is in the loop and when they're not? We actually need to think about the deployment of these agents in the same way that we would think about our broad kind of enterprise IT infrastructure and the observability and monitoring capabilities that we have around that. I think that is something unique and differentiated that IBM is doing inside of this space. We also here, you'll see a bit about what we're doing with agents in totality in terms of the architecture of watsonx Orchestrate, which is kind of the core business focused and domain focused experience where you can introduce yourself to IBM's generative AI capabilities. The one thing I'll call out here that's pretty unique is on the top. It's what we call our multi-agent resource coordinator. Okay, so I want you to think about LLMs and agents actually operating at scale, having an input and being able to do tons of parallel processing across those core capabilities, deciding which LLM is actually the best fit to generate the output, and then having deployment, observability, and having a human in the loop to actually make the right decision. Just in closing, there's tons of different use cases that IBM has pursued here. You heard me inject a couple of things about our own, what we call client zero story. And one of the unique things that IBM has done with our watsonx platform is to say, we're gonna put it to the test and drink a little bit of our own champagne before we actually go out to market with many of these things. Our CEO gave a pretty kind of bold initiative to our SVP of Transformation and Operations a couple of years ago and said, you need to be able to generate $3 billion of productivity through the use of the very technology that we're taking to market. To date, we've achieved around $2.5 billion of productivity across areas like finance, procurement, HR, customer support, and IT modernization, as we have used and leveraged the very technology that I talked to you about today, okay? We also are doing a number of things within the government segment. If you think about use cases around citizen digital experience, some of what I mentioned with NASA and applying their geospatial data and capabilities to build a very unique domain-specific model. If you think about what we're doing in the court segment, okay, around applying AI to the judiciary segments and applying it to court cases so that people can make better non-bias and more ethical decisions around those rankings. We think about things like intelligent asset monitoring. We think about some of the processes. We've done some use cases across very complex processes like water detection. Okay, so thinking about if you have a parks and rec system and you're doing monitoring and thinking about where could a leak be, or did somebody leave something on, and the amount of money that that actually generates, or how do you actually, contact someone to go fix this before they go home for the day. There's lots of areas that we're applying AI and automation across this framework. So one thing I would encourage you to do, we actually have I don't even think it's called a booth today, guys. It's a watsonx house that's out there where you can see many demos and get more information on this technology in action, and you can see it happening. I would encourage you to stop by and learn more. Many of my colleagues are going to be there for the remainder of the day and would be happy to speak with you. Thanks so much for your time, and have a great rest of your summit.